Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for a Tax Practitioners Board webinar. My name's Lun Lak, and I'm joining you from Gadigal country. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I would like to pay my respect to them and their culture and elders, past and present. To begin, I have a few quick housekeeping messages for you. Firstly, to obtain a copy of today's slides, you can visit our webinar resources hub at tbb.gov.au/webinar hub. We'll also email you a copy of the slides. Today's webinar counts towards your continuing professional education or CPE, and you can claim 1 hour for attending. In relation to claiming your CPE, we will issue an attendance certificate to those staying on for the duration of the webinar. Today, we'll discuss how to protect your practice with proof of identity. We'll discuss the increasing importance of being vigilant in undertaking adequate client identification processes that will help minimize risks of identity fraud. The ATO will share some insights on the things that can happen when tax practitioners processes don't minimize the risk of their practice being the target of fraudulent activities against themselves, their clients, and their client's business. We'll share some case studies and then we'll answer your questions. We have Daniel and Eddie from our policy and legislation team, and a representative from the ATO to respond to your questions as we go along. So please submit them using the Q&A. To find the Q&A, simply move your mouse over the screen and a range of icons will appear. We do have a lot of people online today, so we may not get to all of your questions. However, we will have FAQs available on our website following the session. You can also use a chat function to speak with other participants, but if you want a response from us, be sure to use the Q&A. Also, to disable any of these functions, simply move your cursor over the relevant icon and unselect Show Preview. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Sky Webb, one of the ATO's directors responsible for tax practitioners risk, and Deborah Anderson, our TBB board member. Welcome to you both. It's great to have you with us today. I'll hand over to Deborah now to kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Lun, and hello to everyone who's come and joined us today, and a big welcome to Sky. Thank you for joining us today from the ATO. So today's webinar is all about helping you understand the proof of identification or POI requirements so that you can take steps to verify your client's identity, which in turn will help protect your business, your clients, the greater Australian community, and of course our tax and super systems from identity fraud. We're all working in an environment where remote working and increasingly reliance on technology are now the norm. And although this brings so many positives for the tax profession, it also increases the risk of fraudsters attempting to steal people's identity, which can be used in a wide range of criminal activities, including tax fraud. Unfortunately, in recent times, we've seen a lack of proper identification processes in practitioners' practices, and as a practitioner, you have a responsibility to protect your clients, the Australian community, and of course our tax and super system from identity fraud. Although most of you are already undertaking proper client verification checks, this webinar is a great opportunity to go through the POI guidance together, and you can compare your current processes with our guidelines. The TPB have worked and continue to work with the ATO to develop the requirements and help enhance and uplift our client verification processes so that you can minimise the risks of falling victim to identity crime. Now, while the Tax Agent Services Act 2009, which I'll call the TASA because it's such a mouthful, doesn't specifically mention POI requirements, there are a number of provisions that you may breach if you fail to take appropriate POI steps to verify a new or even an ongoing client's identity. the representative of that new or an ongoing client, and making sure that the representative has the authority to represent the client if that's applicable. So these code items are code item 1, which is acting honestly and with integrity. Code item 7, ensuring tax agent services are provided competently. Code item 9, which is taking reasonable care to ascertain a client's state of affairs, and not undertaking appropriate POI processes may also impact the fit and proper requirement, which is a requirement for registration. And lastly, Section 50-20 of the TASA is a civil penalty provision which registered tax and BAS agents can breach if they knowingly or recklessly make statements or lodge documents with the ATO that are false, incorrect, or misleading. As I said earlier, we know that most of you are already undertaking client verification checks, and our requirements are designed to make those processes contemporary, but also to make them consistent for all tax practitioners. The expectation is that you will undertake POI prior to providing any tax or BAS agent services. And we also expect that you'll undertake POI on an ongoing basis for your existing clients as appropriate. And I'll discuss those logistics and the timing of those later in this presentation. So let's have a look at what information you will need to verify when clients or their representatives seek to engage you. So firstly, we'll focus on individuals. So for an individual client, you need to verify the client's full name and either their residential address or their date of birth. For individuals using a representative, so that might be, for example, a husband and a wife, where you're dealing with the wife and she's representing the husband, you need to verify both the client's and the representative's full name and either their residential address or dates of birth. And importantly, you also need to have the express authority for the representative to engage you on behalf of the client. Now, moving on to non-individuals, and by non-individuals, you obviously realise I'm talking about partnerships, companies, trusts, not-for-profits, those types of entities. You need to verify the client's full name, and either it's ABN or ACN or any other detail that will help you to reasonably assess, using your professional judgment, the legitimacy of this non-individual client's identity. And because an individual needs because a non-individual needs an individual to represent it, there's lots of individuals, you will also need to verify the representative's full name and either their residential address or date of birth. And again, because they're a representative, you need to verify that the representative has the authority to engage you on behalf of the non-individual client. And I'll touch on that a little bit later with some further information. So now let's look at what evidence you should cite when verifying or validating a client's identity. For individual clients and representatives, one primary photographic identification document, such as a driver's license, an Australian or foreign passport, or a government proof of age card issued in Australia, will be sufficient. If there is no photo identification provided, you need to then cite both a primary non-photographic ID and a secondary ID. So a primary non-photographic ID includes documents like an Australian or a foreign birth certificate, a citizenship certificate, or a government-issued concession card like a pension card or a healthcare card. The secondary ID can be a Medicare card, it can be a council rates notice or a utilities bill, but they do need to have been issued in the last 3 months. You can also use an ATO or other government agency notice. So, for example, a notice of assessment or a letter from the ATO, but it does need to be issued in the past year. And you can also use electoral roll details. If you're trying to identify an individual under the age of 18, you can also use a letter from a school principal that's issued in the last 3 months, and that needs to have the individual's name, their address, and when they attended school, and a student card if that's available. To verify the authority of individual representatives when you're acting on behalf of another individual client, you can use official or legal documents such as an enduring power of attorney or a letter of authority. And if you're trying to verify a parental or a guardianship relationship for a representative, you can use a birth certificate, adoption papers, court orders, a letter of authority, or a signed doctor's letter with explanation of circumstances, because of course we're not just talking about minors, it can be incapacitated people as well. So coming back to verifying that an individual has the authority to act on behalf of a non-individual, such as a company or a trust, etc. Here you will need to cite documents such as the certificate of registration of a company, or a current ASIC company extract identifying the individual representative as a public officer, a trust deed, or even a partnership agreement can be used. In the absence of any of these, you can use other documents using your professional judgment and expertise to satisfy that the individual is authorised to represent the client. Noting, of course, that original documents, noting that documents can either be originals or a certified copy of the originals when we're doing identification checks. So when you are doing your identification checks for the individuals, make sure that when you're citing the documents that the photo on the ID identification appears to match the details and the appearance of the client or their representative. So, actually looking at the photo, does this person look like them? Is it around the same age? Are they the same gender, for example? Also check and make sure that the name, address, and date of birth all match the information provided by the client or their representative. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have been working really closely with the ATO to ensure that our requirements and the ATO's methods for client verification are aligned to minimise any burden on you. In situations where you have followed the ATO's guidance to undertake proof of ID, you will also generally meet the TPB's requirements. That said, I do need to point out that while the ATO's methods for client verification are primarily for tax and BAS agents who use ATO online services, the TPB's guidance applies to all tax practitioners, regardless of whether they are using the ATO's online services or not. And importantly, the ATO's client-to-agent linking process does not replace or override your obligations to undertake a client's proof of identity. And that's a really special point that you need to know. The client-to-agent linking process only provides the ATO with verification that someone has the authority to act on behalf of an entity in online services for business. So the process does not verify the identity of the person that has engaged the services of you, the tax or BAS agent. And the ATO have more information on their website regarding client verification if you need it. Now, we know it's not always possible to cite IDs in person, and you will often have to rely on electronic communication. And the good news there is there are various ways you can safely and securely obtain IDs electronically. And these include systems like secure websites, portals, secure online mailboxes, secure messaging, or even a digital verification service. We strongly recommend not to use email for communicating any sensitive information, such as IDs, for your clients, except where there is an encrypted or password protected attachment to send and receive the personal information, remembering, of course, not to put the password in the email, in the same email. Please exercise an abundance of caution when communicating via email. Email is not a secure form of transmitting information, and there is a real risk of emails being intercepted by third parties during transmission. If in doubt, we strongly recommend you obtain professional advice from an IT security provider as to what controls are appropriate for your business. If you do deal with clients remotely, another option is to use mobile phone FaceTime or a computer webcam to cite documents. That way you can see the person like you can see me now, and you can see their identification. Whatever method you choose, please make sure you record a note of the proof of identification checks done, and I'll talk about the record keeping requirements shortly. In circumstances where you engage with clients online and without visual medium, you should refer to the ATO's requirements for verifying their identities. Now, most of the time, POI checks go smoothly. However, if you're not quite sure, or if you identify a discrepancy with the information that you've been provided, or that is claimed by a client or their representative, don't be afraid to ask additional questions. That is what the expectation is. Ask more questions. Ask for additional documentation or evidence, or even see if you can independently verify the information provided. Whatever you do, make sure that you take notes and document all of that. If you're still unable to verify, or you're still not satisfied with the information provided to ensure the identity is correct, decline the engagement. You should also consider notifying us, the TPB, the ATO, ASIC, or any other relevant authority if you find yourself in that situation. Now, not all clients have conventional identity documents, and some clients may not be able to provide the documents that, I mentioned earlier. And some of those clients might be, for example, if they are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander clients, if they've been affected by a natural disaster, they may have come to Australia as refugees, or they might be experiencing domestic violence and are unable to access their identity documents at the moment. In those situations, we understand that you may not be able to apply all of those required checks that we've discussed. And what we say here is take a flexible approach and use your professional judgment. Do maintain records outlining what those clients' circumstances were and the steps that you've taken to establish the identity. If you would like more information on this, or you work in that particular area, AUSTRAC website have some great assistance information on there that can guide you through that. Now, moving on with what to do with respect to existing clients, and we know that you all have clients that you've provided services for 100 years, and you've got a well-established relationship with. For these clients, while in some cases it might not be practical or even necessary to do the proof of identity checks, we recommend that you first assess whether or not you do need to do a POI check on them. And to make this assessment, we suggest that you consider a range of factors. So the first one is the extent of your relationship and the familiarity with that client. So, for example, one of my clients is my son and my daughter. So I've made the assessment. I don't need to do identification checks for them. Another one to look at is the client or their representative requesting a change of contact details or bank account information? Or are they requesting an amendment to tax returns or asking you for statements that, to prepare statements, that result in higher refunds? And sometimes in those cases, there might be an estranged relative or something like that. So you do need to verify who you're dealing with and that they still have that authority. These factors can help guide you in determining how often to conduct proof of identity checks for these clients. Another one to check is, particularly when you're dealing with representatives, for example, husband and wives, making sure that their relationship, they haven't separated or divorced. And we did have a case recently where a tax agent was dealing with the husband and wife, and one of the spouses put all the income against the other spouse because they were now getting divorced, but the question was never asked. So if following your assessment, you decide that a proof of identity check for an existing client or their representative is not required immediately, you do need to keep a record of all the factors that you considered when you were making that decision. And as always, tax practitioners are expected to rely on their own professional knowledge and expertise in making these assessments. In my practice, I've taken the opportunity to say to all my clients, there's a new requirement to do POI, and I've just made it part of my annual tax checklist and information and document gathering. So everybody's been more than happy to oblige so far. And in fact, most people were surprised that we didn't require 100 points of ID or that we've only just had to start doing it. So it's been well received. So the next logical question is, what sort of record should you keep as evidence to show that you've undertaken the POI checks? So consistent with the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner's guidance, particularly in relation to the Australian Privacy Principle 11, which is the security of personal information, we do not require and we do not recommend, I stress, do not keep copies of originals or copies of any identification documents of clients or their representatives. I'll just say that again. We do not require and we do not recommend that you keep copies or originals of any identification documents of clients or their representatives. We strongly discourage this practice because we recognise that these documents may be at risk of being stolen through cyber attacks or even physical break-ins at your business premises. However, we require that you maintain a record such as a checklist, a document documenting that you did the POI checks, and you need to note information such as the date and the time that the POI was done, the type of identification documents cited and whether they were originals or if they were certified copies, how the documents were cited, was it in person, was it electronically, and who performed the checks and their position within your practice. So when you're doing the type of identification documents, it might be, for example, driver's license, a New South Wales driver's license, and I usually write, instead of the driver's license number, I just do XXX and then the last check digit number on there. Something like that that shows that you actually did it. The record must also include a confirmation that the identification documents were clear, legible, and that they identified the client or their representative, and that you had no reason to question the identification documents provided. Again, if you decide that you're not going to undertake POI for a well-established client or a representative, you must record your reasons. So as I said, my reasons, I haven't recorded Max's, is because I'm Max's mother. So, I have actually documented that in his file. It is important that you record all these details as soon as you do the POI. Don't rely on your memory in case there's a problem down the track. And you're also required to keep those records for at least 5 years after the engagement with your client or that representative ceases. So that's 5 years after the client has left your practice. At the beginning of the presentation, I discussed the various provisions in the TASA, including the code items that you may breach if you fail to undertake appropriate POI steps to verify your client or their representative. For code breaches, we may impose one or more administrative sanctions, and they could include a written caution. It could be an order requiring the tax practitioner to undertake one or more actions, such as a course or in education, or having a cyber security expert look at your systems, or we can even impose suspension or a termination of your registration. If we determine that a tax practitioner no longer meets the fit and proper requirement, which is an ongoing registration requirement, we may also terminate registration. And as I said earlier, where appropriate, we may also apply to the federal court for a civil penalty to be imposed for serious misconduct, such as making a false or misleading statement to the commissioner. Excuse me. I'll go into a couple of case studies because these always put it into perspective, and then I'll pass over to Sky. So in this case, we had Mr. Tung. Mr. Tung was a tax agent and he was approached by 6 people and he'd never met these people before, and they gave him the details of 346 taxpayers and asked him to prepare the tax returns for all these taxpayers. Surprisingly, that wasn't a red flag, but we won't go there. Mr. Tung didn't ask for any proof of identification information in relation to either the 6 individuals or the 346 taxpayers that he was asked to do their returns for. Mr. Tung also ignored the pre-fill information. So when the pre-fill was different to what the information he was provided, he ignored it and he didn't ask any other questions to either the individuals or the 346 taxpayers about the discrepancies. And not surprisingly, but very surprisingly to Mr. Tung, the lodgements made by him were cancelled by the ATO as the associated tax file numbers were compromised. Who would have thought? Mr. Tung advised that he considered the arrangement that he had with the 6 individual representatives was fine because he was provided with bank details for all of the taxpayers, and he had no reason to doubt the legitimacy of the taxpayers' bank accounts, even though the same bank account numbers were being used for multiple taxpayers. So we at the TPB investigated Mr. Tung and found that he had breached Code Item 1. He'd lodged income tax returns, notwithstanding there'd been a serious issue with the credibility of the taxpayers supporting documentation provided to him. He breached Code Item 7 by not undertaking adequate inquiries with the 346 taxpayers in order to ascertain if the information that was provided to him was accurate. And code item 8, amongst many other things, he incorrectly claimed things like the spouse offset and deductions for work-related expenses in the tax returns that he lodged with the ATO. He also breached code item 9 by relying upon information such as payment summaries, signed taxpayer substantiation declarations and handwritten taxpayer details provided by the 6 individual representatives, and not taking any steps to verify the accuracy of the documentation provided. So the Board Conduct Committee also found that Mr. Tung was no longer a fit and proper person, and as a result terminated his tax agent registration, applying a 3-year period during which time Mr. Tung cannot reapply for registration. Mr. Tung appealed the decision at the Old Administrative Appeals Tribunal, now the ART. However, the tribunal upheld the TPB's decision. I'll go on to a second case study here. And here we had a registered tax agent that engaged with an individual solely on an online platform. The agent did no POI checks to validate the individual's identity prior to providing services, which included the lodgement of some income tax returns. Upon lodging a tax return, the ATO contacted the tax agent to advise that the identity of the taxpayer who the individual claimed to be had been compromised. But despite this notification from the ATO, the tax agent re-added the taxpayer to his client list and continued to lodge additional tax returns on behalf of the client, or the taxpayer, I should say. Our investigation uncovered that the tax agent had breached code item 1. They lacked honesty and integrity by re-adding the taxpayer to their client list, despite the ATO's express advice that the identity of the taxpayer had been compromised. And code item 7, because they failed to provide services competently, in that they did not undertake POI checks prior to providing services, or even after being notified by the ATO that they'd been using compromised identification. In this case, we suspended their registration for 6 months, and we ordered them to consult an accredited cybersecurity expert to review their procedures on lodging tax returns, with a focus on verifying client identity and dealing with potential identity compromise, and also provide us with the report from the cybersecurity expert and advise us of any changes, or all the changes made to their processes following that review. So before I hand over to the lovely Sky from the ATO, I just wanted to remind you all that we have a great source of information on our website. We have so much information there. A lot outlining our POI requirements, and we will be sending links to a lot of this information following the webinar today, but there is a lot more on there. So, you know, in your spare time, go and have a look. We've also developed a really handy fact sheet which summarises our requirements that you can share with your clients, so that they know that you could be asking them to verify their identity, and they'll be expecting it and not surprised. So now, on that note, I will hand over to Sky, and she will go through the ATO side of the presentation, and then later we'll come back for questions. Thank you. Over to you, Sky.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everybody. My name is Sky Webb, and I'm currently a director responsible for tax practitioner risk in the ATO. I lead teams focused on preventing, detecting and responding to high-risk tax practitioners' behaviour in collaboration with people across the ATO, external stakeholders and, of course, the TPB. The teams I manage include our intelligence hub, our fraud response team, and our early intervention teams. As Deb has said, and as you know, strong client verification helps to protect you, your clients, and the tax and superannuation systems from misuse and abuse due to identity theft and related issues. We're seeing, obviously, in this environment, we're seeing a lot of identity theft, and client verification processes really is one of our guards against the wrong people having access to our systems and having access to that information. It's important that as a tax practitioner, you are vigilant in undertaking adequate client identification processes as set out by the TPB. We really ask that you think about your obligation to be sure of the identity of the person you're dealing with. If you're not sure or you have concerns, please do further checks. You're encouraged to go beyond the minimum requirements if you have concerns about a person's identity. So before coming here, I asked members of my teams to send me some examples of things they've seen where agents have not conducted client verification. The first couple of examples are from my early intervention teams. So these are people that go and talk to agents and talk to them about their practice, talk to them about some of their clients and maybe some of the risks that we're seeing in the client activity. And really it is an education opportunity, and the feedback we get from these visits is really quite high. So I don't know if anybody online has had a visit from one of our people, but I do know we really appreciate that opportunity to talk to agents one-on-one and to talk about how their practice runs, how they store information, and then zero in on some of their clients. So one of the examples that one of the team members gave me was where a tax practitioner, where all their communication was done online, with the client attaching all of their data as well as their ID to an online form, and the agent completing the tax return or BASs based on what was included in the form. The agent never spoke directly to the client except via email if that was required. Also, although the ID was checked, it was never verified that the person that completed the form was the person attached to the identification. In this situation, we spoke with the agent regarding the risks, and we really encouraged them to look at changing their relevant processes. We also had to refer this agent to the TPB, but what we found after working with the agent is that they did firstly start to change their processes, one by getting the client to send a photo of themselves holding a sign with their business name and date. And then secondly, they adopted an external verification process. Another engagement that we had through our education program really looked at trust, and also that included culture. We firstly worked with a tax practitioner who didn't directly meet with their clients, and they didn't do client verification because they believed there was an element of trust due to them being from the same culture. We again had discussions with the agent to really talk to them about, we understand that trust within cultures, however, there is a requirement around client verification processes. And again, through working with them, they were able to adopt strong identification processes. The other side of that is we do see complacency around trust, in that we see that sometimes when an agent gets a referral by an existing client of a new client, well, I trust that existing client, so I don't need to do proof of identity on that new client. And again, what we would like it to be is every new client needs to have the client verification done as per TPB guidelines. I'll now walk into a couple of our more fraudulent cases. So one is really, I called it here in the on the slide there about, are you being targeted? So this is about where agents are actually targeted for their practices and really for practices that they're not doing. And so what we've seen is, in one particular fraud case, is where there are a number of false BADs for entities not carrying on enterprise were lodged through an agent. Originally, we thought that it was an agent-driven fraud on the Commonwealth. Of course, we investigated the fraud and talking to the agent, investigating bank accounts and so on. We actually realised that this agent was prone to doing poor client verification processes. And through looking at bank accounts and so on, we realised that the agent did not benefit financially from these activities. So what we started to realise was that this agent was targeted by crime syndicates who went, they're not going to verify. We're going to use this agent as a vehicle for us to commit crime. And of course, sadly, we also referred that agent to the Tax Practitioner Board. The other one that I've got there is, are you okay with being the go-between? And the example we had there was a bit like an example that Deb spoke about. So a registered agent was approached by an unregistered preparer who asked the registered agent to lodge multiple client BAS on their behalf. The registered agent didn't take any client verification activity prior to lodgement, and they just accepted the figures provided in the BAS. Our risk models identified the suspicious BAS lodgements, and they were referred for pre-issue audit. And the registered agent, of course, when we spoke to them, was unable, firstly, to show how they identified the clients, and also unable to provide documentation to substantiate the significant claims in the BAS. So through pre-issue audit, the credits were reduced to zero and penalties were imposed. And again, we had to refer that agent to the TPB. Also, I just want to say that through those last two examples, we know that the vast majority of agent or tax practitioners are honest and are working all the time to adhere to the TASA and also to any rules applied by the ATO. However, people sneak through when there are no client verification. We also are seeing complaints by taxpayers alleging an agent has lodged a return without authorisation. When we investigate, we find out that the taxpayer has been a victim of third-party identity takeover. And then what happens is the perpetrator has the information, they ask the agent, there's no client, so they approach the agent, there's no client verification. The perpetrator asks for forms to be lodged on the third-party account, and then a false ATO refund is received by the perpetrator. We are seeing a lot of compromised identity and third-party fraud. We obviously get approaches from clients through our call centres saying that they feel that their identity has been compromised. We obviously do compromise treatments so that we can safeguard the client's identity. And we always look, that indicator is on that account until we can work through how we can get other identity documents and so on. So really, we are depending on the strong client verification. While that is rules by Deb, sorry, not by Deb, by the TPB, we also agree with Deb that if you do follow our proof of identity, you would normally follow the client verification. We defend on this as an important line of defence. And also, we feel for every agent, if you do it up front, you can prevent issues down the track. So you may avoid reverse workload, correcting lodgements, dealing with audits from us, and also potential referral to the TPB. And then that last one there was about the should you treat referrals differently. Just as I said, again, trust is really good, but really what we would ask is that every new client has strong client verification done. So I think that's my case studies, Deb. let's be open for questions, I suppose. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Guy. And thank you also, Deborah, for your great presentation. I think there was a lot of information there for everyone to unpack, and we've had a lot of questions coming through. And one topic that you did cover, Deborah, in your presentation was how to do POI checks on historical clients or clients that you've had for some time. And we've had a lot of questions about that. So I was just hoping that you could just reiterate that information and let people know what they should do if they do have a long-standing relationship with a client.
Look, everybody has clients that they've been dealing with for a really long time. Best practice is that you do a verification of identification with them. You don't have to necessarily do it today. If you've got, 8,000 clients, you can do it in a wave of it. But, as I said, I'm just doing it every year now. It's like part of my checklist is to just verify their identification again. And you've got to realise that sometimes, and I think Sky mentioned it, you don't realise that the person you're dealing with on the other side is actually not the person you thought you were dealing with, particularly in this electronic age where we're getting everything by email, things by checklists that are online, all of that kind of information. It's a really scary world. So, you need to protect yourself, your business, but also your client. They'll be really grateful if you're checking their identification and it turns out it wasn't them.
Thanks, Deb. Sky, did you have anything you would like to add there at all?
Yeah, I think that, again, it is about I look at client verification as how we're protecting both the client, the agent, and the tax and super system. And it's just this day and age, we keep on coming back to trust, and it's lovely to trust people, but you never know who that other person is. And if you just don't want to be the vehicle for that crime sort of thing. So, yeah.
And as Sky said, we've both seen from the TPB side and the ATO side where particular agents are getting targeted, and it's the agent who just doesn't do it. And, we've had situations where it is a friend of a current client, so, I refer someone to Sky, but that person's actually using me to get a warm intro so that Sky doesn't do her job. And, people are really cunning. So anyway, next question.
Thank you both. So Deborah, this one's for you, and it's a BAS-related question. So I know that you're a bit of an expert in this space. But if I am a bookkeeper and do not take clients on to do tax work, do I still need to do a POI for my clients as I only provide BAS agent services?
Absolutely. When we talk about tax practitioner, a tax practitioner is a tax agent or a BAS agent. It can be an R&D provider. The reason we say tax practitioner is because the legislation says tax practitioner board. So, but when we say tax practitioner, we are talking about everything. The TPB, if you are a registered agent with the TPB, you need to POI all your clients, every single one of them, right? So that is a requirement. It's a very key requirement difference between the ATO's requirements, because theirs is about the online services in particular. For us, it's about knowing your client.
Great. Thanks, Deb. I've got a question from Mark now, and Mark's asking about a client who's a school age, child, and just wondering if you need to still do a POI on that child if you've got the parents as an existing client.
I saw that question come in and it was a great one. Thank you, Mark. Look, if you've known that kid, he's been coming in to see you with his parents for the last 20 years, you probably don't need to do his POI today. However, that kid will have a driver's license if he's, old enough. And at some point you do need to do a POI, right? You cannot trust that everybody is doing the right thing. All right. Although, you know, he might be 16 and he's got a part-time job at McDonald's right now, but you know him, you have met him. If you haven't met him before, absolutely you should do some kind of POI. And it can be his birth certificate. Nobody is going to be offended that you've asked them for proof of identification.
Thanks, Deborah. I've got a question from Constantine as well, and this one's for both of you actually. So it's asking, will the ATO or TPB be providing a secure platform for the exchange of proof of identity information? So who wants to take it first?
I am unaware of any platform that is being discussed. That's my thing. Sky's nodding ahead as well. Look, in most cases, you can do the POI in person. You know, you just sit there with the person, get their driver's license, make sure you look at the picture. I mean, the amount of times we've seen where someone hands over a driver's license that's been doctored, right? And they just haven't like taken it, or they've gone, oh, I haven't noticed this has actually got a picture stuck on it or something like that, you know. It is just about, you know, taking reasonable care. Julie, there was one question I saw which I'd like to...
Yeah, go for it.
Right. You know me, I like to go rogue.
Do my job for me, Deborah, I like it.
So Lisa put a question in that's in my accounting software. The details of the POI are recorded. Is this sufficient, or should I keep a separate document? Lisa, that is a great question. And the reason it's a great question is that, yes, it is enough. However, you need to keep records of that POI check for 5 years after you cease to be working for that particular client. So if you finish working for that client, because I don't know, let's think you retire, are you still going to have access to that MYOB software for 5 years after you cease to be that client's agent, right? If you change software, you know, we all do that now. Do you still have access to it? With SaaS software being the norm, you don't have access to that software anymore. So you really need to be thinking about that.
Yeah, thank you. Sky, was there anything you wanted to add to that one at all from an ATO perspective, or?
No, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's fine. Just thought I would ask. I've got a question here from Brady, and Brady's asking, a month after receiving an ethical letter, the new agent contacted Brady and his firm asking for the TFN of the client. So they provided that over the phone, and they were asked why they didn't email it. And just curious, I guess, as to what's the best way to be sharing TFNs, and is the phone the best way to do that?
Great question. Firstly, I'd be getting the TFN probably from your client is probably the best way to do it. The second thing is, if the client doesn't know it, get the client to ring the previous agent, is the second one there. But, you know, telephone is probably the safest way to transmit a TFN between anybody.
Great, thank you.
And, you know, technology can change. And I think that's the thing we need to be really aware of, is that, you know, these things are changing really quickly, and fraudsters are much smarter than anybody in this room, all 5,000 of us. So, you know, they are always coming up with new ways. So always be vigilant.
Thank you. Okay, the next question I have here is, if a client is referred to me by another tax agent, do I still need to perform POI? And I think you've touched on this, Deborah, but if you could just, give a bit more detail.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One, you cannot trust, and it's, Guy, you know, you brought up trust today. Trust is really amazing, right? Because it makes us do silly things when we trust. So firstly, one, you cannot trust that the other agent has done the proper POI. And secondly, you cannot trust that the person that is dealing with you is actually the person that your fellow practitioner thinks they are. You need to verify. You need to be sure, hand on heart, that you know who that person is. And if you don't, it's POI.
I agree with that, Deb. I think that it's also the agent is now taking that risk. And so, you know, you've got to be comfortable with the risk you're taking there. I do want to say that we have seen, rarely, I'm not saying all the time, but we have seen the occasion where a deregistered agent has contacted another agent and has transferred their list over to the new agent. And we monitor that, and we wonder sometimes whether the new agent is understanding what they're signing on for and that these were clients of a deregistered agent, and what can happen from there. Because obviously we have seen examples of where deregistered agents then make their way back into the system, either as an employee or using what we call a tame agent. And so, you know, again, it's what risk are you prepared to live with? And we would say that you need to be able to, you know, sleep at night knowing that you've verified your clients and that you're not taking somebody else's risk there.
And Sky, we see that too at the TPB, and we take tame agents very seriously.
Thank you both. I've got a question now about using a third-party software to onboard a client. So if you do use a third-party software and they provide all of the details through that software, including TFNs and photo IDs, do you still need to contact that client and request perhaps a video conference, or is that verification software enough to prove their identity?
It's a great question, and the answer is it depends. So if you're if they're just sending you a copy of their driver's license and their Medicare card or something like that, for example, you haven't actually verified that the person that sent it to you is the person in that photo, right? So yes, do a Zoom conference or a Teams or meet with them. Something that you can actually verify that the face that you're dealing with is the face on the identification. A better system, one that I personally prefer, is using a digital, a DVS, digital verification.
Yep.
However, you have to be so careful, because I only learnt recently that sometimes, unless you tick biometrics, all they're doing is checking that that driver's license is a valid driver's license number. They're not actually checking whether the person is uploading that particular identification. So if you are using a digital verification service, you need to be double checking that you're using the one with biometrics on it. So that means they have to, put in their driver's license, for example, or their passport, do a selfie, and it verifies that that person is actually the person in the document. You also, in that case, you don't actually get a copy of the document, so it's even safer. And what they do is they send you a certificate that you can keep on file that tells you what they identified, what documents were used, but without any of that identification detail that we don't want you to keep. So, but remembering they're not all equal. So do your investigation and your due diligence on the DVS systems.
And Deb, I was just going to jump in there about really jump on the idea of the security of the identity details. We have recently seen a few examples of practices being burgled and people coming in and they're actually going for their secure paper bin and things like that. So they're getting into the old-fashioned way of let's go through paper now. And our ID details are so important to us that we really need to make sure that we're not taking copies of them at all.
Great point. Thank you, Sky. I know that we're sort of running out of time and we've got a lot of questions there. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we'll go through the questions following the webinar today and we'll put some FAQs together and provide those responses on our website. So we won't, we're not ignoring your questions. We will address them. We're running out of time today. So I just wanted to ask one quick last one before we do end. And this one's about verifying clients that are overseas. Is there anything extra that people need to be aware of if they have a client who's operating overseas?
Yeah, another good question. Use Teams. Do it visually, and just be really, really sure. I think don't trust. I think trust no one unless it's a dog is my my thing. But yeah, do be really careful because we do see there are a lot of overseas, I'll use the word actors, that are trying to get into the systems and take your money. So, or take the government's money. So please, if you are unsure, if something smells bad, if it doesn't feel right, just say no.
Good point to end on. Thank you so much, Deborah. And I'll just quickly give some information on how to stay in touch. So if you'd like to connect with the ATO, you can keep updated by visiting their website at ato.gov.au, and you can also follow them on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and also I believe you've got Instagram now, Sky, so that's also available as well. And then to stay in touch with the TPB, obviously our website you can jump on as well, tpb.gov.au. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Also highly encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do record all of our webinars and we've got a really comprehensive library available to you there on the YouTube channel, and you can still claim continuing professional education as well for viewing those videos. We also have our monthly e-news, which is TPB e-news. So again, please feel free to subscribe to that by going to our website. And just to finish up, I want to give a big thank you to Sky and to Deborah for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you to Daniel and to Eddie and to our ATO people on board for assisting with the questions as well. We hope that you found it beneficial today, and don't forget to claim your CPE for attending. And then just one final thing before you do finish today, we have an exit survey which we'll be launching. So that just pops up in your browser once you leave the session today, and we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to complete it. So you can also let us know if there's any topics that are of interest to you as well. So we will have a look at that and try to put those into our program for future webinars as well. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope to connect with you all again soon. Thank you.